Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This one is going to be my first Avatar Diamond Select Toys action figure review. In this one I'm going to be reviewing Katara from Wave 1. My full Wave 1 did come in, and I think it's best that I do them in individual videos. So Katara is going to be first, then Zuko, then Aang. That's the order I'm going to do them in. And on this first one, I just want to go a little bit sort of in-depth on the packaging. For the other two videos, I really will just give a quick look at it and then get straight into the figure. But this really surprised me, getting these, having them in hand for the first time, with just how big the packaging is. You probably already get a sense of me just holding it up here. But especially if you look at it from the side, probably the best way to do it is there, and you can see through it. There's probably about 5 centimeters of just excess plastic just here at the back that doesn't need to be there. And then there is a lot of sort of wasted space on this, all around. They definitely could make this packaging a lot smaller, because I was shocked at the size of the box that just the 3 figures in Wave 1 came in. Look at the size of this pile of just 3 figures. And again, in the grand scheme of things, the figures themselves are relatively small. It's just a 6-inch scale figure. So it's just something around the size of this with a few accessories. 3 of them. And the box that the 3 come in is that big. To me, that's just kind of crazy, just how needlessly big the packaging is. Now, I understand to a degree the idea that they have a sort of standard packaging, and some of the figures are going to come with really big accessories, some of them will come with lots of accessories and stuff like that, but still, I think just in terms of just maybe even just the depth, that could definitely change, and I think they could just shrink it down a lot more anyway. A good example of that would be just comparing the packaging to previous stuff. It's the previous Avatar toy line. I just have one of the card backs from it, but again, this gives you a sense for this is how tall it was, this is how wide it was, and then the bubble, of course, was nowhere near as big as this. So, height-wise, of course, they're actually basically the same. The difference is if you do it side to side, it's so much wider, and then especially in terms of depth, obviously this bubble was nowhere near as tall as this one. But again, those figures were basically the exact same scale as these. If you look at them, it's the same scale as the previous Avatar toy line. Yet this has this crazy, unnecessarily big packaging that I could see to some degree why people would be like, oh, but it's for mint and box collectors, it's a really cool thing. But it's also massive, I just showed you holding all 3 of them. Imagine by the time Wave 3 comes out, you have 9 of these, and it's this massive kind of thing that's this big just for 9 6-inch figures. That's pretty excessive to me. As for the packaging, just itself, it's pretty nicely done. You've got a sticker kind of here on the front, on the bubble here with, Katara. You of course have the name here, the logo, collector's action figure with accessories, Diamond Select logo here, nice image of Katara on the side, which might be why it is so big, Wave 1 on the back plus the information. And that's pretty much about it. The main, obviously, feature of, I suppose, the packaging is the fact that the card obviously wraps around the side here, and then you sort of have to just kind of rip this off to the side, and then it's just more like a standard action figure. So that's just, discussing the packaging. And the final thing I'll just say on it is that they could make this so much smaller. Look at this, the Kakashi figure I just showed you earlier on. Same sort of size and scale in a so much smaller box. Look at the size of this box compared to that. Same size figure. This comes with more accessories. Nothing as big, I suppose, as Katara's one, but still, it's so much smaller. Even something bigger, like this Figma Kirito from Sword Art Online, it's obviously a bigger box than this, because the Figma, of course, the Figma, comes with a stand and the stand arm and stuff like that, and some relatively big accessories in that, like, it's Alfheim Online Kirito, so it has like the wings and stuff like that. Still, much smaller box than this, both in terms of like width, height, everything. Now, of course, those are more high-end figures. Of course, they're Japanese, they're much more expensive and stuff like that, but it gives you a sense for, like, this is very excessive packaging. Very, very excessive packaging. And I was honestly shocked by just how big one action figure is. It was crazy. Just the box that I got was like, just the 3 figures were like this big, because obviously they couldn't find just a box that was nice enough to just fit the 3 of them nicely, so they had to go for like the size up or whatever. It was just really, really kind of weird. So yeah, before I get behind camera to discuss the figure, I'll just actually just do a kind of more detailed sort of opening of this figure on camera here, just to show you, I suppose, you know, what it's like just opening one of these up. So yeah, let's see. So okay, so you know, this obviously just kind of is kind of glued down here. It folds open, and then yeah, there's nothing particularly fancy going on here. It's just some cardboard sort of folded over to give it that sort of 3D effect. And then it's obviously just linked on here. And then, yeah, apart from that, it is just, you know, obviously then it's just the bubble on a card like the old Avatar action figure that I showed you. So we'll just open this up. So yeah, the whole card, you know, just comes off. I'll probably keep this at least for a little bit. But yeah, here's the bubble off the card. And then, of course, they do it in the sort of standard way where it's like a tray. You take the kind of main tray out of the sort of front bubble, which of course, again, that's just a sticker on the plastic. And then, yeah, it is sort of, it's not twist tied in. It's got those sort of, yeah, those plastic things that are make it sort of awkward. But yeah, there's a look at sort of everything you get in the packaging. You get your base stand here, the stand arm for the effect part, Katara herself, the big water bending effect part, and then she does come with 2 other sets of hands. So, yeah, I guess, you know, that's just I'm not going to sit here on camera for ages and just pull these little plastic things off. So I'll get behind camera now and actually do the review. So here is Katara. I've taken her out of the packaging, had a chance to mess around with her. It's my first experience with a Diamond Select action figure. So, you know, I took my time to, you know, get used to the way they kind of do things and so on. Did a little bit of posing and stuff like that. And yeah, now let's get into the review itself. I think the first thing I want to get across here is just the importance of the fact that, you know, we do have a Katara action figure now. The original Avatar toy line is mainly notable pretty much just for the fact that it didn't have any female characters. Despite Katara's importance in the story, you know, Toph, Azula, all these important female characters, the original toy line didn't ever do any of them. I believe there was plans right at the end, just as it was cancelled, that they were finally going to do a Katara, but ultimately it was cancelled before that happened. And I think the main thing I'd say about that initial toy line is just that they probably went in too big too early before the fandom had fully formed, and if they'd waited probably, like, say 6 months to a year, they probably would have had much more success than they did have. So yeah, the original toy line is mainly notable for just you know, constantly redoing Aang, Zuko, even Roku getting like multiple like redos, repaints, remolds, whatever you want. Like, they just have so many versions of characters like this, to the point where you have like Aang in Water Tribe clothing, like an outfit he never wears in the show at all, but they did it. They did like completely clear, transparent, like painted blue, like Avatar state versions of Aang and Roku and all these other things, but not a single female character. So, you know, that's why it was so significant, like last year when the Katara Funko Pop came out. It's just to have that first, Katara, in plastic form. And then that's why, this was so important. And I think it's why they decided to do book 1 Katara over book 3 Katara to start off with. So we had that initial Katara. They did the sort of just historical thing of just initial Katara's first figure. And then they can do book 3 Katara down the line, because ultimately I think most fans would prefer book 3 Katara, and I think book 3 Katara would make for a better action figure. This figure definitely has its limitations, because it's trying to be as accurate as possible, but it also really highlights that her initial design doesn't make for the most ideal action figure, as we'll get into here. But I think just looking at this pose I have set up here, using pretty much all the accessories that you get. She's on the stand, we're using the stand arm for the waterbending effect part, and we're pretty much trying to almost like do the same pose that they're doing in the Funko Pop. That sort of, early octopus sort of style thing, before she fully masters waterbending and does the full ring to make all the different tentacles and so on. This is that kind of first one of just us holding up those two kind of streams of water around her back. That's like her initial sort of trademark pose. And it looks good. I just think with the way they did the molding on the hands and so on, it works out very nicely that you get this pretty nice pose, and like you can move it around to get it exactly the way you want. I especially like that the legs are articulated enough that you can do like a wide enough stance to make these poses work. Like the Funko gets across with its molding of just that the way Katara's clothes are here, she still has to do a wide stance, and so it's that effect I think works really nicely here. The one thing I would say just with regards to the accessories is that, I don't really count just one pair of different hands as being an accessory, especially when they don't add to anything. So the only accessory as such I would say that we really get is the water effect part, because this the water pouch is already sort of on her. It's just part of the figure. Like you'd have to take the figure like apart basically almost to get it off, or just do a really awkward pose. Because it's already on, I don't really call that an accessory. That's just part of the design. So it's one of those things where, like, yes, they all come with this plastic stand. They all come with the arm to do some sort of effect part thing with. So that is just sort of standard to the figure, because like they barely stand if they didn't come with the stand itself. So that's probably the only main weakness here, is that they're saying it's a collector action figure with accessories. And I don't really get the idea, because for one, the left hand, as far as I'm aware, they just give you basically two versions of the exact same hand. Like, this is basically identical. I think it's slightly different, but in essence it is the same hand, the same pose. The fingers are splayed out in the exact same way, thumb is in the exact same position. There's no different, it's just a replacement hand. So I don't see why you would ever swap that hand for this hand, unless it was sort of like a packaging mistake and she's meant to come with a different hand. Because the left hand, there is a difference. They have her hands like fully together like this. That's the one I have on here. And then the other one is more like a mirror of the other hand, where like it is sort of more splayed out like that. So at least that's something of like, a bender sort of directing an attack like this versus just sort of controlling it with their hand open. So there's some value to that, but I don't know what they were doing with the other hand and giving you basically identical hands. They're relatively easy to change out. You can sort of see the way it works here. It's just kind of got a sort of peg here. It's kind of friction kind of locked in. And yeah, it's just, you have to pull fairly hard, but it comes out easy enough, and then you just put it in and try to not overly like bend it back and forth so you don't break it. So let's take some of this apart here. I'll go over the stand first here, so I don't have to go over it in the other videos for the other characters. We'll just address if it is any different on those characters. So the base is just a standard clear base diamond select. You've got a peg here that plugs into the peg holes on the bottom of either foot, and that's how you make them stand. So that actually works pretty well in that, like, you only need one. You don't need to plug both feet in. It just needs the stability of like one. And so that's why I had a pose here where she was sort of half stepping on and off the base. So that's pretty cool. And then you have the peg hole here for the stand, of course. And again, it just plugs in. Fairly nice. The one thing I do like about this though is that the arm here is sort of it's customizable effectively. Like, you can take the joints out and plug them in different parts, and so you get these different kind of bars that are of different lengths, and you can order them whatever way you want. So you get a long one, you get a kind of medium one, and a small one here, and then of course you get the four kind of directional arms. Again, because of how specific this water effect part is, there's only really one position to put this in. Like, you can maybe angle it slightly, but like, it only goes in that way because the peg hole for the water effect part is here. So basically you have to support it from underneath because it's not strong enough to really hold it in like that, because it will fall out eventually, like just by like moving it slightly. Thankfully, like, this is completely flexible, but it's not that sort of plastic where you can bend it and it like holds position. It's just a kind of nice, flexible, transparent piece of plastic, which I think is good. I like that it is flexible because it actually looks quite nice as a water effect part, especially like this end. And you have the kind of droplets coming off it. It gets across the idea that, like, yeah, like they're keeping it together. Like, there's a lot of control that goes into holding just like a kind of a U of water like this kind of over your shoulder. So the effect part is very nice. I do feel like it probably should have come with a smaller water effect part. And I don't really mean the Walgreens one where you get that perfectly spherical ball of water, but like something like an ice shard or something like that. Just a smaller effect that you can like use the arm to sort of hold like in front of her as if she's firing it out or something. Just something that she uses in the show, like an ice disc or something like that. That to me would have been something nice to do. But yeah, that pretty much covers the accessories. Like, to some degree, like, yeah, bending effect parts for Katara is pretty much all you would want. Maybe the bottle of water from the Spirit Oasis could have been something they added in as just like a small little accessory that references an episode, but for what they have here, like, this is actually a very nice accessory. It's exactly the one you want. Hence again why the Funko Pop used the exact same pose. So yeah, 2 hands, that water effect part, stand base, stand arm. That's what you get. Now, as for the figure itself, let's just get her back into sort of a neutral pose in here and just show you sort of the extent of the articulation. So, here she is in sort of like a, kind of T-pose style thing. Just showing you the kind of general kind of character design here. And it's just like, yeah, that's good that she can do that. That the jointing works in such a way where you can do the full, splayed out T-pose. In general, I actually really like stuff like the head sculpt. I think it's nicely detailed. You can see like the eyes are painted very well so that it comes across, it matches the animation style. The paint is actually quite well done, and like the eyebrows here and here. And even just like details like the hair loopies is quite well done in that it is just like an extra bit of plastic that's sort of, stuck on up here and then painted to have the sort of like hairpiece effect. And then like as you come around the back, it obviously groups together into this kind of one kind of bun thing at the back, and then it goes out here into the full sort of larger ponytail. There's no articulation on it, which I don't really mind because it is made of flexible plastic, so when you move the head, you're not really going to risk like damaging it or anything like that. The only fear I have when moving Katara's head is just that because it is sort of stiff, it's that sort of action figure where like there's so much paint on it, everything when you move it just has a slight, you know, sound of friction, as you can sort of hear there. And I just feel like if you grab it like and you touch off the hair loopies in the wrong way, you could potentially like pull it out in a way and damage the figure. And I don't think there's that likelihood of it happening, but you know, you just don't want to be careful not to like put the pressure on those hair loopy bits. But yeah, other than that, you know, nice detail on the betrothal necklace here, and then like there's the peg hole in the back as well. If you want like a really sort of stable pose, or if you want to do a pose of her like jumping and doing some sort of a bending, you can do that as well, and like hold her up, basically. That's basically the idea of like, you know, flying Katara, if you really want to, but you know, that's just for fun. It gives you posability options, and I like that they've included that there. Yeah, you can see like on the arms, like there's a nice sort of transition from like the kind of darker blue into the lighter blue, and then into the sort of navy on her arms. It is such an interesting color scheme when you actually get the, you know, a figure like this and you're really analyzing the sort of character designs. Like it's very colorful, but it's like a weird blend of like 3 different sort of shades of blue. And yeah, like I said, the hands, you know, they're nicely sculpted and stuff like that, but like they're a little too similar. It's the main thing I'd say about that. But yeah, otherwise, like her outfit is really nicely done. I think it's detailed, painted enough for this price point. You know, the $20 to $25 price point, that I'm perfectly fine with it. And then yeah, her kind of feet here. Again, the paint is nice. You know, there's little bits of like minor things where like the paint overlaps a little bit here, but you know, for this price point, that's perfectly fine. It still works quite nicely. In terms of like, so you can actually see the articulation here of her legs. This is probably where the Katara figure is the most articulated. That's why you could see the wide pose I was able to do. Like the outward motion is actually quite well done. You've got a thigh swivel up the top here, so you can do those type of poses. You can see here double jointed knee. So there's one kind of under the knee, one on top of the knee, so you can do like kind of crazy poses like that, which you want for a bender character. You want them to be able to do quite extreme poses like that. So that's definitely a big positive. The only weakness potentially with Katara is just that the ankle kind of joint here isn't the greatest. You know, it does go side to side, but it's kind of a bit of an awkward one, in that like you can barely tell exactly how the joint is sort of put together. In that it's kind of an ankle tilt, it's kind of an ankle swivel, but it's mainly just like a back and forth kind of type thing like this. It's enough to where you can get the main poses that you want, of just making sure her feet are in contact with the ground sort of at all points, like that. And she does, for the most part, stand up on her own. Like, it's not that the figure is just impossible to stand on its own, but like you can do it all right for sure. So yeah, the jointing there is actually quite well done. She does have a waist joint here, as you can see here. It is kind of completely above this whole section here, which makes sense. It would be a little awkward if the joint was sort of underneath all of this. But yeah, it's enough to get what you need. Like you can do the full 360 there at the waist. There's no like kind of ab crunch joint of like the character kind of like leaning forward. That's more on sort of like higher end figures. Shoulder, you know, you can go all the way around. There's a decent range of motion here. It can go just a little past kind of 90 outwards. And then the elbows is where it's very interesting on this figure. This is where her outfit kind of comes into play quite heavily, of like, you'd realistically want the same double joint on her elbows, especially for a bender character, but they can't really do it here just because of how the layering works here. Of like, this is thicker than this section, which is thicker than this section, and then her elbow is meant to be sort of like in the middle of all of this. So what they do is the actual technical elbow joint is at the sort of transition between the light blue and the navy, but it's sort of limited because of the molding on the kind of the baggy section here. So you only get about like, what, 75 degrees of motion there. You can't quite do the full 90, but like it does swivel around. It's just not the most useful joint for sure. But the interesting thing though is that you do also technically have a joint here. It's just a swivel at this sort of blue section, but I suppose it's helpful for some stuff, maybe. And then the typical, you know, swivel in the wrist, because of course you can take the hands out. So by the nature of how they go in, there's a swivel, and then the hands of course are jointed to be able to go in and out like that. So yeah, that's fine. And then like I said, the head is just sort of a kind of pretty basic ball joint. Like you can have her, sorry, let me just try and get this better. So yeah, you can have her sort of go side to side just a little bit, like up. There's not much up and down motion. There's only like about a few degrees of range there. But yeah, you can look side to side. And then, you know, you can rotate it a full 180. I just don't want to potentially damage this. Again, it's a little tight just because of all the paint. Like the figure is, like, as far as I can tell, completely painted for the most part. In that you do notice on stuff like, especially the ankle joints, when you move them for the first time, you notice just a little bit of paint just kind of chipping off, because like it feels like they assemble the figure maybe then paint it or something like that, so that when you move it for the first time it just chips a little bit off where the joint actually moves. But it's to be expected. As for the detail on her water pouch here, it's nice. It's exactly what you expect. It kind of fits in quite nicely, and I kind of like the fact that it moves around a little bit, that it just it makes it feel like more of an actual kind of accessory and stuff like that, that it sort of assumes some natural positions depending on what way you have her posed. So yeah, the only real weakness I'd say in the articulation here is just that probably that the elbows could be better, but it's mainly down to the way it's sort of like assembled for the most part. But other than that, I think the figure is really, really nice. Like everyone's been waiting for a Book 1 Katara for so long. I think this is a very, very good Book 1 Katara. As far as I suppose this section goes here, it is just kind of flexible rubber here. And it flexes easy enough. Let me try and do some sort of a pose where it kind of more leans forward a bit. How awkward or not is something like this? Like, you can see it's not ideal in that, like, if it was fabric, you know, this section would kind of naturally go down like this, but there's a certain amount of tension to it. But I think it works all right. It does sort of limit you, because like you do have to like really like move this up to be able to move the joint as forward as you'd want. And that's just the design, pretty much. Like, being accurate to design means like you're never going to be able to move her leg particularly forward unless you really make sure that this sticks in the right position that you want. But for the most part, like for a lot of the poses you'd want sort of Book 1 Katara to be doing, where it's more of like wide pose, it actually works quite nicely because her legs end up sort of coming out of the sides anyway, and then only needing to move forward just a little bit to get across the idea of the pose. So that's definitely a positive. So yeah, like there's some cool stuff that you can do. Definitely, it's a nice figure. So yeah, I suppose in conclusion, the main thing I'd say is that in general, for the price point, really, really good figure. The only weakness on the figure itself, I feel, is just that the elbows for a bender character should be probably better, should have a better range of motion. and then just the fact that this is really the only accessory that you get, and you can only really pose this accessory in one way. That's the main weakness. The fact that she doesn't come with any other water effect part to get across anything else is the main weakness. So yeah, so final thing will just be just some sort of comparisons here. Here's the Katara Funko Pop. Here's her next to the Aang from the original toy line. Here's Roku from the original toy line. And, you know, the scale, these I think are slightly bigger in scale than these figures. But in general, they're relatively close. So I think there's a decent example here just with regards to, like, you know, how they do sort of just sculpting on the head. Definitely it's nicer here because just the molding feels a little bit more accurate. The painting feels that little bit more sort of realistic to get across that approach. But it just highlights that, you know, this toy line back in like 2005, 6, 7 was actually fairly decent with, you know, head sculpts and stuff like that for the time. Articulation definitely has come a long way. You can see like this only has like a single joint that just barely goes 90. You know, the arms are actually fairly okay, and you know this Aang, you know, actually has the same sort of problem here with the elbow, in that like his elbow actually moves just it's actually probably about the same. You know, it has the same issue of just that the clothing, when it's really baggy like that, it's very difficult to do properly. But yeah, there is my review for Katara. For the other two, you know, we won't be going as long. This was the first one, so I wanted to go fairly in-depth. But yeah, there is the Katara Diamond Select action figure review. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.